What's up? You're listening to The Long Game, and I'm your host, David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital. In this episode, we chat with Andrew Kaplan. Andrew is a coach for heads of growth through his company, Delivering Value. You can check him out at deliveringvalue.co. He provides one-on-one career coaching for heads of growth, advises product-led SaaS teams, and he hosts a podcast where he speaks with growth leaders about the toughest moments in their careers. That podcast is called Delivering Value with Andrew Kaplan. Before he was a coach, he was the head of growth at Postscript, now one of the largest Shopify apps on the marketplace. He was also the director of growth at Wistia and part of the early team at HubSpot. In this conversation, we talk about how he typically works with his coaching clients and the common challenges he helps them work through. I asked him about why he decided to make such a big pivot from being a growth leader to coaching other growth leaders. And we get into product-led growth a little bit, but the more interesting part of the conversation was learning how he developed the skill of coaching and helping others improve as growth leaders. I think you're going to learn a ton. Here's my conversation with Andrew Kaplan. Andrew, it is so great to have you on The Long Game. Welcome.
Hell yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've seen you on LinkedIn for many, many years, and here we are getting to have a live conversation. So I was looking forward to this. So I'd like to start, maybe I can give you my knowledge of your story from a outsider's point of view, and I'd love for you to fill any gaps if I miss anything here. So just based on some of my research, preparing for our conversation, you were also at HubSpot for a bit. I was there, I think, after you left. After HubSpot, you went to Wistia to do some acquisition marketing. There, you kind of started exploring what was, before this whole growth thing was a thing. I think you were part of Reforge before that was even a whole thing, but you were watching these recordings of people using the product. They would sign up, they'd use it for a short period of time and left. And you're like, wait, that's not good. And so you kind of started talking to the product engineering team and talked about improving product onboarding and adoption. And again, that was before growth was even a thing. You eventually started working with the product team, became director of growth, I think before anyone really knew what that meant. And then after that, you went to a company called Postscript, where you were also head of growth. It's probably going to get really interesting there, where you started pivoting to focus on coaching. And you focused on your company now, Delivering Value, where you're coaching other growth leaders. And you've been doing that full time, I think for the last, is it 2 years, 3 years now?
Dude, 3 years in June, in a month.
That's wild.
Hell yeah.
Did I miss anything there? Anything you'd add?
No, I mean, that's pretty good. So I started at a big ad agency, which is just the beginning of my career. I worked at Digitas, which is like Mad Men style agency. I was there a couple of years. Super fun. I got to work with Disney and Aflac and Bank of America and all these Fortune 100 cool brands that would spend hundreds of millions on paid ads back in the banner ad heyday, 2008 to 2011. Cruised at HubSpot, was there for 3-4 years, loved it, went to Wistia. And that's where the transition happened, where I identified as a technical marketer, growth marketer, acquisition marketer, marketing ops type person. That was my background. And I started driving more signups, but the total number of sales didn't go up. And Wistia had tens of thousands of paying customers, hundreds of thousands of free customers, free users, and nobody working in sales.
Wow.
And there was nobody really doing e-commerce for the business. And I was like, oh, this is just what I want to do forever. This is amazing. It combines all my technical skills and analytical tendencies, and I can just problem solve and test and figure stuff out. And I started to use the product really as a marketing communication tool. And that's kind of where I got into the growth world, and things kind of kicked off from there.
Yeah, I think I might have had a similar experience where I started HubSpot, and then I was that guy hey, can we get this data? Hey, can you send me all these data exports? I want to do this analysis. Or, hey, I'm going to go update this page and write the HTML and CSS myself. You don't need to do it. And people are like, what are you doing, man? You're not allowed to, or we don't do this.
Right, stay in your
lane type of thing. I'm like, but no one else is doing it. So it sounds like there's a similar path there.
Totally.
So I want to talk about kind of your coaching, because I've worked with various coaches in my career, mostly around mindset, executive coaching. Tell us about how you typically work with your clients when it comes to specifically working with growth leaders. What does that look like?
For sure. And I just want to caveat, I use the word coach respectfully. My mom is an executive coach. She's been a coach my whole life. She has degrees in coaching. She was the president of the International Coaching Federation in Boston. She's worked with all kinds of very impressive executives. I'm just a dude who worked in tech that loves helping people, that at some point in time figured out that I was maybe pretty good at it and decided this is what I was meant to do. So I use the word coach because people understand what that means. But I like to caveat, like, I'm not an executive coach. I haven't been to coaching school. I have a lot of lived experience. And because of who my family is, maybe I've picked up some of those things by osmosis over the years. But really what I do is mentorship for people who work in tech that really have my former job. So people that work within a degree or two of having the head of growth, director of growth, VP of growth type titles. And typically, folks will reach out to me for, usually they're having like one of three challenges is why they reach out. Either they're trying to become a head of growth and they can't get there. And they're like, I'm so close. I don't know why I'm not getting hired. I can't get a promotion. I'm missing something. I know I'm missing something and nobody will tell me what it is and I can't figure it out on my own and I need help. So it's sometimes that. It's sometimes I'm a head of growth and things aren't going well. I'm in a position where either I'm getting some tough feedback or I'm not having the impact that I hoped for, or I got laid off and now I'm going to another company and my spidey senses are tingling again, but it's some flavor of I have the job and I need help. And the third flavor is I'm head of growth at a company that could become a unicorn. And if I do nothing, the company will eventually outgrow my skill set. And I don't want somebody hired over me. And I want to continue to grow so that I can grow with the company and grow into the leader that I've always dreamed of becoming. So it's usually one of those three things. And typically what I'll do is work on folks to help them increase their impact and their influence, if I really summarize it. And sometimes that includes like rubber ducking on their strategy and helping them figure out, are they doing the right things? Almost all the time it involves translating their growth strategy to non-native speakers. So like communicating their strategy to execs and to other members of leadership. Sometimes it's improving how they actually get the work done. So like their operating system. And other times it's just learning, how do I level up as a leader in this cross-functional capability where it seems harder? So those are a lot of the different ways that I'll work with folks.
Yeah, I love the way you described it. It's like communicating to, quote, non-native speakers in growth.
It's so hard.
Yeah, it's because you're kind of in a situation where it's like, this is so obvious. Why don't you understand? But having someone like you kind of be reflecting things back is probably extremely helpful for realizing that you could probably communicate things a little bit differently, meet people where they're at versus kind of throwing this jargon at them.
I feel like so many people have gotten feedback that's like, hey, you need to be more strategic. And they're like, what the fuck does that mean? Right? It's like, what does that mean? Be more strategic. I think I'm being strategic. I think I know what to do. I know way more what to do than you do because I've been studying this for years and years, but it's often translating the stuff in their head to other folks. It's hard. And nobody really pulled me aside and showed me how to do it. And I basically made a bunch of mistakes and I try to help folks not make the same mistakes I did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even working in a head of growth role anymore, but I'm helping a lot of my team members with communicating to execs. I'd love to hear maybe if you're able to share, just to make it more tangible, because I think a lot of folks are working on this or realize that they'd like to improve those communication skills as well. What's an example of a situation where you're working with a coachee where they're having trouble communicating something, and how did you kind of help them work around that situation?
So there's someone who I'm picturing that works at one of the AI copywriting companies. There's a few of them and they work at one of the major players. And they were trying to scale their team. And they knew that they needed to scale. The company was growing, the acquisition, the top of funnel was growing, their user base was growing, and they didn't have anybody working in sales, a totally touchless environment. And they knew they needed to scale their team, but they were having a hard time convincing their boss about the potential impact for these folks. And so they were saying, hey, I'm the head of growth. Why aren't you listening to me, essentially? And I was saying, take yourself out of it. Why don't we do an exercise where we take a step back, we analyze the growth model holistically, we find a couple areas of opportunity, and we talk about if we were to go capture this opportunity, what would the upside for the business be? And then let's talk about the resources that we'll need to go execute on that upside. And then let's talk about the risks of inaction. Like, what's the cost benefit analysis here? And then it's packaging up that conversation into a summary so that an executive could read it and then debate it, right? I feel like the debate part is often, sometimes people who are new to leadership roles, when there's debate, think, I'm doing something wrong. They should just listen to me. They hired me to do this thing, but really debate is actually an important part of the process to getting to understanding and alignment and that internal aha. So it's kind of how we approached it. It's like a mix of what to expect in mindset and then more tactically, what does it look like to make this case?
It sounds like you helped, I don't know if this is the right phrasing, but remove the ego, remove the self from the picture, just objectively looking at, hey, if leadership has this goal, how is what you're proposing going to help them achieve that goal? And then the debate part is really interesting. And I love the way you framed it as like, that's actually a really important part. And I'm also trying to remind my team, like, hey, if we're debating things internally, or even if a client pushes back on your recommendation, that's actually where you should be thinking more critically. It's not a no, it's a help me understand.
Yeah. So when I learned this when I worked at HubSpot. So I was at HubSpot for 2011 to like 2015-ish, about 4 years. And I was part of the professional services team, which was like 2 of us on the team. And it was basically a consulting unit to HubSpot customers. There's only 2 of us. It was like brand new at that time.
Wow. You were very early on that team.
Dude, it was sick. It was so fun. It was like my dream job because you would just get this cool data set and you talk to the customers, and it wasn't like new user, click here, do that kind of stuff. It was like, hey, we've been using HubSpot for years. We have a marketing challenge and we just need another brain to help us figure it out. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. So anyway, so I got to travel around and I would do on-site workshops and I'd wear my sport jacket so I could look more important. And so at some point in time, they had a real consultant come in and do some training. It was someone from Bain or McKinsey or one of the big players. And I raised my hand at the end and, any questions? And I said, yeah, I get a lot of pushback sometimes when I pitch something to a client and I don't know why they're pushing back. I know it's the right thing to do. I've seen it work for other folks. How do you manage that? How do you avoid that? And they were like, oh no, I crave that. If I don't get that, it means I didn't do something right. It means either they're totally disagreeing and they're being polite and they're just trying not to embarrass me, or it means that I totally missed an important checkpoint. And so I learned that the way that they described this was the way that humans make decisions is the last thing that they do to get to aha is they have to poke at it. They have to understand it. They have to detangle it a little bit. And sometimes that feels like pushback. It feels bad for the presenter. But when I started craving it and realizing like, oh, I'm getting close to their understanding and their alignment, it just changed my whole perception of it.
What's really interesting is just hearing the way you speak and kind of the challenges that you work on with your clients is interesting because it makes me reflect on my time when I was head of growth at B2B SaaS company based in SF. They're like, I think Series B or Series C when I joined. And it was essentially my first head of growth role. And now looking back, I'm like, I probably should have hired Andrew to help me with this because I think I was in the second bucket of I'm head of growth, but I don't think I'm being taken seriously. And I don't think they're listening to me. And I'm not sure if I'm set up for success. And I don't know what the way around this maze is. But I just wanted to share like, oh, now I understand what the value is of having that sort of coach specifically for a role, not just, executive or mindset coaching where someone with the lived experience can be like, oh yeah, that's very normal. Here's what I recommend, or let's talk through it.
We all need that, man. I feel like once you learn that you can have a coach in whatever your professional endeavor is, you never have a moment where you don't want to have a coach. You're like, oh, that's so helpful to have somebody give me perspective, normalize my challenges, help me problem solve, pump me up, teach me new stuff. Just somebody who's in my corner helping me win. Like, who doesn't want that? Like, once I started working with the coach, I feel like I've taken time off in between coaches, but I'm always like waiting to graduate into the next level of coaching and professional and personal growth. And so that's cool. That's cool that you see that too.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, so you said your mom is an executive coach or was an executive coach. I didn't catch if she's retired or.
She's not retired, but is heading that way, like kind of winding down.
I'm curious what the conversation with her might have been like when you decided to go full-time coaching. Was she like, oh yeah, continuing what I'm doing? Or was there a lot of excitement? And I'm curious about that shared experience.
Oh, it's such a great question. I kind of hid it for a long time. I was sort of embarrassed. It is like the honest truth. Not that I was embarrassed to do what she was doing, but I was like, I'm not legit. It's like my mom's legit. Like she's just done all these things and she's been doing it for like 25 years, probably 35 years, like longer than she's been my mom. She's been doing it. And I was like, I don't want to offend her by doing what I'm doing. And so eventually she's like, hey, I see you on LinkedIn. I see you're calling yourself a coach. I know what you're doing. And she was just like, that's amazing. And so she's been very cautious not to overstep. But now when we chat and she's like, oh, how's business going? I'm like, man, I have this amazing person who I had a consult with that I know I can help, that wants my help, that won't. And she was like, oh, that sometimes happens. Maybe ask them these types of questions. And so now we kind of relate in a totally different way. And she gives me a little bit of free game. And it is very cool. The truth is I'm doing this because my mom always worked at home. Like, so when I would come home from school at 2:30 or whatever time I got home when I was in 4th or 5th grade, my mom was always in our office. We were very early to like the work from home game, and she would be in there coaching someone. Sometimes they'd be in person. A lot of times she'd be on the phone. And so I think I heard it. I heard it literally in the other room, what it sounded like to help somebody, what a breakthrough sounded like, what types of things were normal for folks to struggle with. And so I feel like I wouldn't be here without that,
Yeah, it's really cool. It's almost like you were getting secondhand coaching and also learning how to coach secondhand without even realizing that might be a skill you'd end up using yourself.
Totally. Dude, when I started at Postscript, so Postscript is grown into one of the largest apps in the Shopify ecosystem. I started early. I was employee number 10, but it was clear it was going to grow into a big business. So I was excited to go there. And I met the founders. So it was a fully remote company. The founders flew to Boston and we hung out for a couple of days as part of my onboarding. And the first night we go out to dinner, maybe second night, went to this really nice restaurant in Boston. And they were like, so tell us about your family. And so I shared that my mom's an executive coach, and all three founders look at each other and start laughing. And they're just like, oh, it makes perfect sense now. They're like, that's who you are. Yes. Okay. And they were just like, we couldn't figure out if it was real because you seem like you're a natural leader, a helper, a coacher. Even the way that you interact with us is different than the ways that some other folks interact with us. And it makes total sense now. It's all clicking into place. And I was like, I think that's dope. Like that's great. I'm so happy that that's my brand.
Yeah, it's amazing that you're kind of already giving off that vibe before you even gave yourself the label. It's funny that people can just sense that.
Yeah, I just feel like sometimes when you find something that feels authentic to you, things just kind of click. And that's how I feel about what I'm doing now. I made up this job. Nobody else, I think, is a coach for Heads of Growth. Probably there will be more at some point. But I just feel like I'm right where I'm supposed to be. I just felt like my whole life brought me to this moment. And I just want to capitalize it and run with it. And hopefully that authenticity oozes out in different ways, and the energy that I bring and the content that I write and the passion that I hopefully work with clients. And definitely, I think it was part of me before I gave myself the title for sure.
I noticed that despite you kind of pivoting to being primarily a coach, you're still advising folks on growth. You're still writing about growth as well. And I don't know if this kind of reached you a lot on the LinkedIn environment, but I started getting back in like a couple months ago when OpenView closed down, there were murmurs of PLG being dead. I'm sure you probably saw some of those things. I tend to disagree with that. Maybe it's evolved, but I'm curious for you, like, what are you sort of seeing in that world of growth now and what people are trying to do in implementing product-led growth?
Yeah, I don't think PLG is dead. I think that we, as an industry in SaaS, thought that it could be applied to every context easily, and every context could win. And I think what we've learned is that there are certain lanes where PLG thrives. Low average revenue per customer, low friction environment where value happens relatively quickly with ICPs who prefer to buy in that way, right? Like PLG in that environment will be there forever. And it's probably the way that market prefers to buy. But I think we just went too far in the other direction. And it was like, oh, any sales-led company should now just like launch a trial and you'll win too. And like, look at the graphs. The graphs show that you win. If we look at the public companies who have PLG, look, they're all winning. That was just wrong. That was just crazy. We were in like a little bit of a bubble there. And I think we were all reading the same articles and jumping three steps ahead to these conclusions. So I think that PLG being like this magic pill, that is dead. I don't think that ever should have been alive in the first place. And I think if you're a sales-led company, you should probably just stay sales-led. Like you should just grow that way. If that's how you grow, fantastic. You could experiment with PLG down the road, but it's going to be really, really hard to make that transition. There's always going to be friction and it's going to be a hard journey. And I think if you are a company where it makes sense based on some of the things I shared and some other things that I haven't shared, but if it makes sense for your business to be PLG, great. Take it and run with it. You can layer on some sales-led initiatives later. and kind of have the hybrid model and balance the two. But no, I don't think it's dead.
I love that you just said the quiet part out loud, which was, if you're a sales-led company, it's okay to just stay sales-led. It feels like
It's okay.
it's almost like at some points there were so many companies, including the one I was at previously, who were trying to kind of bolt on PLG as like, we have to make this work. We have to, even if it means acquiring multiple companies to try to implement like PLG, which I'll just say didn't work out very well. So I love that you just said that, because maybe more companies now in this environment are realizing like, wait, let's focus on what's working instead of trying to do this thing that's completely unnatural to our DNA.
It's so hard. And to make the switch, like you've got to change the sales incentive structure, which is hard. The larger the company, the harder that is. Or it's got to be like a bolt-on thing on the side, but then you're going to have resource tension. Do you give resources to PLG? Do you give resources to the sales-led stuff?
Yeah.
So I've just seen that be a hard journey.
I mean, that's why I feel so lucky. I mean, HubSpot navigated all of that so masterfully. I mean,
totally.
I think after leaving, I realized like, wow, I was spoiled with an amazing leadership team that was very thoughtful and patient and saw the long game and was focused on that versus, I mean, after getting to see other companies try to implement it and do that transition and honestly, like not go as smoothly, I'm like, oh, wow, this was survivor bias, like N=1 here for me. I thought this was something that could be repeated easily, but that's not the case at all.
I think during those early days, it was magical and you knew it was kind of magical, but you didn't know how different it was compared to other companies. Mm-hmm. And that's how I felt. Like when I left HubSpot, I went to this little company. I don't want to badmouth them too much. With a totally different leadership team, things didn't feel the same way that they felt. And that company ended up getting acqui-hired. Like that company didn't thrive. They went to another company, similar vibe in terms of the leadership team. That company didn't survive. And so I think you just didn't know how magical it was, but totally. Like that leadership team is the best leadership team I've ever gotten to work for. Even the way that they talked about their employee base, they were like, well, we want our employees to go off and be like PayPal. And we want to put up a slide 20 years from now and show the people who are in this room have gone off to found all these other companies that are bigger than this company. And that's what we want. And I was like, man, how are y'all thinking about that just a couple years in, like such a vision. It was dope.
Yeah. Do you ever, I mean, so just reading the content that you've produced and the podcast that you've done yourself, I think to me, it's clear you're really into the nitty gritty of the craft of growth. Do you ever miss actually doing that work?
I love the work. I miss it, man. I do.
Like, don't you ever just want to jump into
I miss the work, but I don't miss the work of like head of growth, but I miss like the growth product management work, like actually running the tests, actually analyzing the flows, actually surveying the customers and analyzing the results, sitting in the room and watching people go through the flow with the team. I love that. I love doing it. I was okay at it. And I was much better at that than I was presenting the strategy for the team and road showing and driving alignment and all the things that I'm much better at coaching others. I always knew what to do. I just didn't like doing it. Never felt good. I don't think I was that great at it. But yeah, man, I miss the craft.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, I moved on from HubSpot because I thought I wanted to do more of that, what you just described, like the road showing and the strategy and the communications. I don't think I really wanted to do that.
Right. You thought you did, right? You thought that's what you're supposed to do.
I'm glad I made the jump and tried it out. And I'm like, okay, or maybe the environment just wasn't right. But I had to kind of learn that the hard way, which I think some of us had to do. Because my mentors afterward, they were like, yeah, that probably was not a good move for you at the time. But now I know.
Now, you don't know until you give it a go, and then you have to learn it the tough way.
So I think we kind of brushed over your transition to coaching just a little bit, but I'd love to hear a bit more about maybe the reflections you were having or maybe realizations you had as, I think you were at Postscript before you transitioned to coaching fully. So what was happening in your life then that made you decide, actually, I like this craft, but maybe the head of growth role isn't for me. I want to be focused on coaching because, it seems like maybe you believe you could deliver more value there. So would love to hear about that whole process and thinking.
I stumbled into it. So all my professional goals were to become director of growth at a cool tech company. Like if you had asked me for 10 years, I would have said that. Like I just was hell-bent on it. I was like, that will be dope. When I get there, I will be so happy. I will be so fulfilled. All my heroes in tech, that's who they are. I want to become them. And then I think I got promoted to director of growth at Wistia. And I wasn't happy and I wasn't fulfilled.
This is it.
And I was like, I was so lost because it was my whole identity. And I was like, well, I don't want to go do something else. This is who I am, but I'm not happy with what it is and who I've become. So now what do? I'm so lost. And I started working with a coach, and she had me do a bunch of exercises, but essentially I hired her because I was like, I think I'm broken. Can you fix me? I think it's me. I'm just like unhappy and I should be really happy. And so she gave me some perspective and reminded me about all these very, very successful people that when they reach whatever goals that they have, whether it's an athlete reaching the pinnacle of their sport or whatever, that typically they fall into a state of like unhappiness and depression. And it's apparently a really common thing, even with like Olympic level athletes, when they win medals, sometimes they feel really sad afterwards because they've been pushing so hard for this thing and now they have it. And now what? Now they feel empty. So it made me feel better that I wasn't broken. And at some point she had me do this exercise where she was like, well, why don't you write down every week all the things that you do during the week and how they make you feel, how your energy is. And I was like, okay, this is kind of when I'm transitioning from Wistia to Postscript. And I said, I'm in a Monday planning meeting. I don't love that. I'm in like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, one-on-ones. Those are okay. I'm in like a leadership thing. Like Friday, we do like data review. And it was all kind of ho-hum. And I was like, you know what? Once every other week, some random person will reach out to me on LinkedIn who has the same title as me at some other company to take me out to a virtual coffee. And I was like, truthfully, that's what I love the most. And so we talked about it a while and she said, well, maybe the next time somebody does that, why don't you say, I'm happy to connect. Here's my rate. And that was really how it started. She planted the seed and I did that. I got my first client. I was head of growth at Postscript and I started doing a little bit of coaching on the side, like Friday from 12 to 1, like during lunchtime, I would work with someone. I had 2 clients. I would talk to each one every other week during that hour block. And that's how it started.
What did you charge in the beginning? Like what did you?
Nothing. I charged
like
nothing.
$5.
And because I charged nothing, they didn't show up. They would always reschedule. They would show up unprepared. I would literally give them everything that I learned. I give them all my templates. They wouldn't use them. I was charging like $200. I can't remember if it was $200 a month or $200 a session, but it was a relatively small amount for what it was.
What were some learnings you had around, maybe vomiting all the knowledge I have isn't going to help them? How did you start iterating on that to get to a point where you could get them to actually maybe take action based on a conversation?
One, I think it is identifying the real problem. I think sometimes people don't know what the real problem is. They'll share a symptom of something that doesn't feel good or something that they're struggling with. And really there's a much deeper thing underneath. Like I talked a lot about nowadays, I'll help folks with their strategy and how to communicate their strategy. But a lot of times at first people would come to me and be like, hey, I need more data. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, what data are you looking for? And we would talk about data and they'd say, well, I have this meeting coming up. I need to prep for it. And really they had no strategy in retrospect. They were super distracted. They weren't using their time well. I just didn't know it. And I don't think they knew it. I didn't know how to identify it. And so over time, I got better at going slower, asking more questions to tease out what the root problem is, and then trying to get really clear on why folks are even working with someone like me. Like if it goes perfect, what does that look like for them? So that I could try to help them get there and maybe point out things that weren't on their immediate agenda that I thought might be stopping them. So I just tried to slow things down a little bit, get better at asking questions, and then see if we could realign towards like bigger success milestones and benchmarks.
Yeah, I'm kind of imagining a scenario where you've gotten all the reps in and you can kind of see what the root issue is, but rather than telling them what it is, you kind of need to go slow and ask them the right questions, guide them to realize like, oh yeah, that's my actual issue versus you giving the answer.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Sometimes I know the answer, but if I tell them the answer, then they have to come to me with the next question. And if I help them figure out the right answer and I guide them to get to that answer and help them evaluate the pros and cons, in theory, they should outgrow me at some point. And that's kind of the goal, right? They'll understand how I think and the questions I'm going to ask to help them gain perspective and gain clarity and evaluate options. And to me, that's what success is. Because, there's no right answer most of the time. It's just trade-offs. What's the best decision we can make with the info we got? And if that's not the right one, what do we do next? And so I just try to help them do that.
That's the name of the game in life, trade-offs, business and personal.
100%. Yeah.
how did you improve your coaching skills? Are there any resources that you really leaned on to work on that?
Yes. If I was to go to coaching school, coactive coaching is sort of the benchmark place to go. There's a coactive coaching certification that you can get. There might even be degrees, but if I was to become a quote unquote real coach, I would probably become coactive certified. And so I bought the coactive course book. And so I read that in my spare time when I first was getting going so that I could improve on my craft. And a core component to coactive in coaching in general is just practice. And so luckily, I was already getting paying clients, so I just would practice with them. And so I don't know if that's good or bad in the coaching community, but that's just what I did. And then a lot of the other books that I had read in my manager and leadership journey were also really helpful. So the other one that has been really helpful is a book called The Coaching Habit, which is one that I usually recommend to any new leader. And it's all about how do you ask great questions to tease out information from people and then help them figure out their own answers. And those two resources were super helpful for me.
Thank you. I'm gonna pick up that book. It was on my wish list for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Any new manager, anyone who's in a leadership position, I think will benefit from that one.
From what it sounds like, it reminds me of Multipliers. That was the book that had a really big impact on me. I should probably give that a reread, but I appreciate the resources.
Hell yeah. What's the TLDR in Multipliers?
The thesis is like the best leaders are like they multiply the intellect of their team, and the leaders that you probably don't have the language to describe why they're not as impactful, or they tend to be diminishers where they make their team feel stupid. And so these multipliers will kind of give their team more autonomy and guidance and help them see what they're capable of. And some of it is dependent on the scenario where maybe based on their experience, you give them a challenge that's maybe out of their comfort zone, and also remind them that they're capable of doing and give them resources, versus a diminisher might say, not give them that challenge because they don't think their team can do it. And so it kind of reframed a lot of I don't think it was anything groundbreaking, but it reframed some of the scenarios in my head of even cases where I might have unintentionally been a diminisher, and remind me or give me ways to approach those situations to be more of a multiplier instead. Still working on it, but it was a really impactful book.
That's a cool way to put it too, where there's moments where you could have been a diminisher, but not saying I'm a diminisher, right?
Yeah.
We probably all have those moments.
Yeah. Highly recommend it.
That's really cool. Have you read High Output Management? I know it's like an old classic.
I have not. I've bought it, but it's just so dry and hard to get into.
It's dry. I know. So I probably read it 2 or 3 times, and it is very dry. There's like the one section on task relevant maturity that I think is unlocked like so much for me in the way that I heard you talk about multipliers, where they talk about task relevant maturity is like when you assign a task to a member of your team or whoever to evaluate not the person, like is this person a capable person, but saying, does this person have experience solving this problem that I'm giving them?
Yeah.
And they call it maturity, but it's basically experience. And so if they have, even if they're extremely accomplished, if they have low experience or maturity solving a problem, they need guidance. They need help. They need someone to say, here's how long it should take. Here's what good looks like. Here's how to pattern match. And on the opposite end, if they have a lot of experience with something, really what they need is for you to lean back and just be available when they get stuck and help them problem solve and all that. And so that to me unlocked a ton, both with working with, teammates, but then also in the way that I managed up, where I started to share, hey, this is something that even though I have a lot of experience in these other things, this is new to me. And I'm actually feeling stuck here. And I think it's because I have low task relevant maturity on this. I need more help on this thing versus this other thing. Hey, what I really just need is let me run and I'll come to you when I get stuck. And so I also applied it to how I manage up. And it's something that I'll kind of share with folks who I coach as well.
Yeah, I love that framing of like task relevant maturity rather than judging the individual. It's like placing their skill set and experience with the thing that needs to be done instead.
Yes.
I'm going to think on that one. Thanks for that.
High output management. You could probably read a summary on Medium and save the other 200 pages.
So I wanted to ask, so I went through a couple of your archives, and in your 2023 review, you mentioned preparing for baby number 2, resetting family life. It sounded like maybe you indexed a little bit too much on work. And I always ask about the experience of being a parent selfishly because I want to mentally prepare for being one. I know there's nothing that replaces actual experience, but I'd love to hear about your experience of building, delivering value while raising a toddler, while preparing for baby number two? Any lessons you've learned that you're going to do differently this time around?
Yeah, things will definitely be different. So when I went full time, June 2021, our son Cameron was born in November 2020. So he was like 6 months old, and my wife wasn't working. She had taken time out of the workforce to be with our son, and it was just me. And so I was like, I got to make it work. Like, I have no backup plan. We owned our home. We had a mortgage. I had a 6-month-old. We had all the diapers and all that stuff. And it was in the height of COVID. So it wasn't like we were going out to restaurants a whole bunch, but we were ordering a ton of takeout. And with our new little guy, we were spending plenty of money. And so I was in like, I'm going to grind and make it work no matter what mode. And so I just put my head down, and I just figured if I try to do the coaching thing and it doesn't work, I'll go do some advising. If I can't do advising, I'll do fractional work. If I can't get fractional work, I'll fucking go on Fiverr and I'll put up some work that's 3 levels below me to make a couple bucks so that we can do what we need to do as a family. And I remember making a course program after my wife had gone to bed, after my son had gone to bed, at like 11 p.m. in my office, like going on 5 hours of sleep, trying to film content to make an online course so I could sell it and gain more leverage. And
wow,
I just was determined. Like, in my head, I saw it working, and I knew I needed to do what I had to do to make it happen. And so thankfully, here I am 3 years later and feeling really good. And obviously, in my reflections from last year, I had a great year last year. By any definition of having a great year, it felt good. Business was good. Income wise, things were great. And with our second child coming in a month, I want to take off more time. And when I come back in, I want to ease back in a little bit more. And I feel like my business can handle that. Like, I can probably work a couple days a week and kind of set up windows for my calls and manage things that way. But the main thing that I learned, we just moved in January. And the main thing that I learned after the move, where I also focused more on things outside of my business for a little bit, is that if I stop marketing myself, I stop getting leads. And if I stop getting leads, I stop getting new clients. And so clients eventually graduate out, and it's important to replace them. And so that's the main thing that I'm prepping for, is, can I keep my marketing engine going? Can I prep for that, even when I'm in low power mode and spending more time with my family? And so I get a lot of my business through content and through social media and through my podcast. And so I've been trying to film a ton of episodes like a crazy man, so that I can still keep things going out. And I've been writing a bunch of social content that I'll probably drip out while I'm kind of in low power mode and spending that time with my family. And that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear, at least during that time of your life, of having your son and starting or focusing on delivering value 100% of your time and just kind of being in that grind. And now you're zooming out, it sounds like, and saying, wait, this is not sustainable. And like, I want to spend more time with my family, especially during kind of these golden years.
Totally. And it's hard because you're tired. And so it's like, it's like you're not sleeping that well. And so I know I'm not going to be working efficiently anyways. So I might as well pump the brakes, be hyper present with my family, a time that I can't get back. And as long as I can keep the business marketing sales engine going, doesn't need to be going a million miles an hour like it has been in the past, but as long as I can keep that going, I feel really good about it. And I think big picture, where I'm thinking a lot about, is the future of my business. I mean, the fun part about working in a one-person business, even with some help, is that you get to make it up as you go. And so for a long time, it's been a business that has been all services, right? I mean, I do coaching, I do some advising, and that's been very lucrative. That's been very good to me. And I got to a point probably towards the end of last year where my roster was full. I can only take so many calls during the day before the quality dips and my energy dips, and I just can't provide the level of service that I want to. And for me to continue to gain leverage, I've just been brainstorming other solutions. And so I'm really interested in scaling more of a media arm in addition to my services side of my business. And so I think a lot about that. How can I scale that? It's the same amount. I mean, I'm already producing content. It's the same amount of work, potentially with higher leverage. What would it look like to scale a $1 million media business, is like how I try to think these days. I'm nowhere near that, but that's the mission,
So what's one opinion you have about business or growth you think people would disagree with?
I don't know if I have like a super hot take here, but what comes to mind for me is that I think the average employee should keep a little bit more distance emotionally between themselves and their employers. And I think I have been as guilty of this as anybody, right? When you work at cool companies, you work at HubSpot, you work at Wistia, it feels like family. And you drink the Kool-Aid and you wear the shirts. And for me, when I was working at HubSpot, I would always wear my HubSpot sweatshirt when I traveled. And it's like people would come up to you, they'd be like, you work at HubSpot? And you'd be like, oh, I'm the man. And what I saw is that when the business needs to make a business decision, they let go one of your friends, they reorg, you get put on a team with a jerk manager, what business stuff, things that just happen normally, you take it personally. And if you ever get laid off as part of budget cuts or reduction, you take it really personally. And so that's like maybe my piece of advice, more for individuals, I suppose, than for business, but there's overlap there, is just to keep a little bit of space between yourself and your employer so that if stuff happens, it doesn't feel personal.
Yeah, perhaps not letting your identity get too wrapped up in that as well, I imagine.
That's a great way to phrase it.
And we've already talked about some advice, but I'd love to hear if there's one particular impactful piece of advice that you've been given in your life that you'd like to share.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me here is when I was working with my coach, she had me do an exercise where I pictured my leadership idol, someone who I looked up to, who I said, when I grow up, I want to be just like them. And so I described this person and she said, well, what do you like about them? And I described some things and I said, they just always seem to know the right decision to make. And she was like, dude, I'm going to stop you right there. She was like, I think that's going to hold you back in your life and in your career. And she said, I want you to stop trying to make the perfect decision because one doesn't exist. And instead, just try to make the best decision you can with the information you have available. And that advice kind of changed my life. And it's something that I'll share with coachees. I mean, if you work in growth, there's always more data that you could get. There's always a more perfect decision. And at some point, that's a distraction from making a decision and moving forward and just continuing to execute. So that's something I think about a lot.
Mm. What's, besides the books that we've already talked about, what's one book you'd recommend more people read?
I was going to mention The Coaching Habit. The other one that I think everybody should read is another old book. It's The 7 Habits of Wealth and Happiness by Jim Rohn.
Oh,
have you read that one?
Not that one. I thought you were going to say like 7 Habits of Successful People or something.
I mean, it's kind of similar. So it's Jim. Do you know who Jim Rohn is?
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah.
So Jim Rohn is sort of, the best analogy is he's kind of like the Tony Robbins of the previous era is like maybe how I think about him, kind of a motivational speaker. And he wrote this book. It's an old book. I think it's 70s. Like it's written like it's in the 70s. It doesn't read, it doesn't translate super well for modern day, but in it, the lessons are incredible. And so the main lessons that come out, I mean, there's 7 of them, obviously 7 habits for wealth and happiness, but one of them is to get clarity on your goals and to write them down and to look at them daily and essentially law of attraction, like manifest your success. And I've seen that work in my life. I'm a huge believer in the power of the mind, in manifestation, and that book put it into practice for me. And so it's one that I recommend to folks. Just power through the weird way it's written and the mentions of God and family and stuff, and just read the takeaways because it potentially can change your life too.
You're speaking my language. It started off as a joke between me and my co-founders around like, we got to manifest some sales or we got to manifest whatever. And we'd be talking about someone that just came to mind, and all of a sudden they'd email us and we're like, wait, this is happening more frequently than, like, we should be taking this a little bit more seriously. We're putting out some sort of vibes or energies into the universe. We just got to believe and manifest. And we kind of started like, I have like a tree made of crystals that my co-founder sent me. He's like, here's your manifestation tree.
Awesome.
And we're like, yeah, we'll just keep it going.
Dude, I got to show you something. You might buy this book. This is the number one book that I recommend more than any business book. It's this. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
I have gotten into like hypnotherapy, like just on like Instagram and TikTok, like hypnosis to manifest faster and like, visualize success. And I ended up in this algorithm where I see a lot of that kind of content. And I see an ad for this book. It's a paid ad with comments on. And it was like, write down the things that you want to happen in your life in this book. It's a journal and they will come true. And there was 1,000 comments on this ad. And I'm scrolling through the comments because I'm intrigued, because who wouldn't want that? And 500 of them were like, this book is bullshit. Don't buy that book. This is a waste of $20. Just use a notepad. None of this works. It's all hokey BS. The other 500 were like, ignore those fucking idiots, buy this thing. Everything I wrote down happened. And it was like literally 50-50. And I was like, well, I believe it will work.
Mm-hmm.
And if I believe it'll work, there's people that are showing that it works. I'm just going to do it. And so when I started my business, I won't flip it because the things in here are personal. But when I started, I wrote down business goals and I passed the first one like 3 months in. Then I wrote down bigger business goals and I passed that one like 9 months. And then I wrote down bigger business goals and it took me about 1.75 years to get there. And now I've got some numbers that are very large in there that I'm nowhere near, but I feel like if I just keep going, eventually I'll get there. Like it has worked for me. So I love that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll buy it for you. Maybe I'll ask for your address after this. It's only $20 on Amazon.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, the downside risk is zero. I mean, you lose $20 or something,
it's zero.
But it'll help you think bigger. I hope so. Yeah, I appreciate that. I have it open on Amazon here. All right, Andrew, last question here is, where can people find you on the internet?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. That's the channel I'm most active on. Andrew Kapland, spelled with a C, Capland. You can also check out deliveringvalue.co, which is where I run my coaching and advising practice. And then check out the Delivering Value podcast, wherever it is that you like to listen. I'm on all the major channels.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link to all of those. And Andrew, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for making the time.
Appreciate it.